Boundary setting at work is less about what you say, and it's more about how you show up consistently and under pressure. And in this live, I'm going to break down a practical framework for setting boundaries that you can use in real time. We'll talk about what a boundary is and what it's not, and the three levels of boundaries, when to use each. And then we'll also talk about boundary weakening behaviors that you want to watch out for. Strong leaders, remember this, if there's one takeaway that you get from this video, remember this. Strong leaders don't match the tone, they set the tone. So hold that thought, and this is true whether you are leading a team or leading your own life. Strong leaders don't match the tone, they set the tone. Because when your behavior is clear and consistent, then people are going to adjust to you. And you only have control over yourself, which is actually a lot. Let's dive in. So what is a boundary? A boundary is a standard. It's here's what's acceptable, here's what's not. And most importantly, your boundary is how you respond. And it can feel uncomfortable sometimes setting boundaries. And I bet you do, and you have successfully in some areas that in your life. And there may be some areas that you want to work on with that. The same is true for me, probably for all of us. But if you feel uncomfortable when you think about setting a boundary in a certain area that you haven't practiced yet, remember that boundaries are not about controlling others. They're just about controlling your response. And that's powerful. And if you feel like you've tried to set boundaries and you feel frustrated, why isn't it working? It's likely not because people don't respect you, but you may be doing some of these behaviors that you want to watch out for that can actually weaken your boundary. Things like over explaining, apologizing. And so if you find yourself doing these behaviors, don't beat yourself up. Just remember, awareness creates change. So you just want to reflect on, oh, I'm catching myself apologizing or starting to over explain. And then you can, just by bringing that awareness, that you can make a new action next time. And so some examples could look like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm busy. So you're apologizing, and then you're starting to explain. But a boundary instead would look like first being honest with yourself about what you have time for, what is important for you to prioritize, and then protecting that time. So you could instead say something like, I'll review this tomorrow morning. So you see you're calm, you're composed, you're in control, and you're setting a boundary. You're stating clearly the expectation. Because the more you explain, the less authority you hold. And that's another, I mentioned setting clear expectations, which is another example of a boundary. So by setting clear expectations, you're creating clarity. And research shows that clarity drives performance. You may be familiar with Google's project Aristotle, that found that the highest performing teams, so they were looking at what drives team performance, and they actually were surprised by the findings that high performing teams, one, have clear expectations, and two, they have psychological safety. So clear expectations, you understand the deliverable. How confident do you feel in your ability to hit a target when it's unclear? We don't feel super confident when we don't have clear expectations of what our role is, where our leadership or your leadership role starts and ends, and the next leader's begins, for example. And then psychological safety. Well, this is about feeling safe to be vulnerable with your team, to take risks, to speak up, to push back, to argue a point. And these are all important actions because they can help foster innovation on a team. If maybe somebody on the team has some really great ideas, but if they don't feel comfortable speaking up and sharing the ideas, then that team is going to miss out on potentially a great idea. But first, to be able to speak up and to push back, to argue a point, to share an idea, well, this also involves having setting a boundary, trusting yourself and your instinct that you do have an important idea, or if something isn't seeming like the right move for the team, pushing back. So these are also examples of boundaries that the research shows can help to improve team performance. And so it makes sense that leaders who lead with clarity and create clarity across their teams versus emotional reactivity are better at driving performance. And also, another data point from American Psychology or Psychological Association found that chronic workplace stress is strongly linked to lack of control and to unclear expectations. So we talked about unclear expectations, but lack of control. If you ever have a day where you're just feeling scattered, where you're trying to focus on a project, something that needs your priority, and it needs to be a priority, it needs your time, but you get a text ping, you get an email, you get somebody calling, can you hop on a call? You can start to feel scattered. This happens to me sometimes too. I'm very good at time blocking because I understand this is my protected time, because here's where I'm going to make the most impact. This is important work to be done. But sometimes we start to think about, well, the other person and their schedule. And when we don't set clear boundaries, what happens is you lose control of your time and your energy. And that, the research shows, leads to burnout. And on a personal level, think about, well, how impactful are you going to be as a leader when you're not protecting your own time? And you want to demonstrate that for your team as well. So boundaries are key because they protect your time, they protect your energy, and it's about holding your standards. And if it feels uncomfortable, think of boundary setting like this. You're not reacting, you're guiding. And there are different levels of boundary setting. So if this is new to you or something that if you find yourself feeling agitated or frustrated some of the time, it's likely that your boundaries are being crossed. So get curious about where you're feeling some pause, where you're feeling some resistance, and see if it might be that you need to set stronger boundaries. But there are different levels of boundaries, and so this approach and perspective might help soften your fear if you have some discomfort around setting boundaries. So let's look at the level one, 3 different levels. Level 1, I call an implicit boundary. And you can take comfort in the idea that you can use implicit boundary setting most of the time. You may not need to escalate further. So maybe even 80% of the time. And the goal is to signal calm authority without escalating. So you want to be clear, you want to communicate clearly and consistently. And so this can look like slowing your pace when you're talking, always staying neutral and composed. So you might feel uncomfortable, maybe a little heated, maybe even a little irritated or stressed on the inside. But on the outside, you can just slow down your speech and you can speak in a way that is neutral, no emotion, just talking in a neutral, composed tone. And remember those behaviors that weaken boundaries that I mentioned that you want to watch out for. Avoid over-explaining and unnecessary apologizing. And then you just want to be direct and be concise. And when you're direct and specific and concise, you're also respecting the other person's time by getting straight to the point. So boundary setting doesn't have to be aggressive. It's actually respectful. So for example, instead of saying something like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize this, I can fix this." So here you're apologizing and then starting to over explain. So if you notice yourself doing this, that's okay. Just catch yourself. And then the next time you can catch yourself and then play back a scenario of a different action, a different line, sentence that you can say, and then you can put that into practice next time. So instead of saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can fix this, I didn't realize," for example, you can say something like, "Got it. What specifically would you like to see differently?" Or understand, walk me through what success looks like here. So what you're doing is you're guiding the conversation. You're not taking anything personally. You're listening, you're acknowledging, and you are staying neutral, calm, composed, and you're showing that you're on board with finding a solution to the problem. So that's level 1. And a couple other examples of a level 1 implicit boundary setting would be not responding right away. If it's not super urgent, if it's not a fire drill, you can protect your time by responding later. So that would be another example, or pulling back a little bit. If you're finding a conversation is more distracting than useful, you can just not respond or pull back or delay your response. So these are some other examples of just you're still setting a boundary. So that's implicit boundary setting. And sometimes we need to escalate. Let's be honest here. People are going to push our boundaries, especially if they're not used to your behavior of you setting boundaries in a certain area. They're just responding to how you've conducted yourself in the past. So it could be that. So by the more you practice setting boundaries, then the more naturally people around you are going to start adjusting. And then the other reason people might push your boundaries, so one, either they're not used to you asserting your boundaries, setting your boundaries. Two, they're not strong enough, or which we'll talk about. Or three, they may not be practicing setting their own boundaries. And so then your behavior is unfamiliar, and this happens a lot. So sometimes, yes, you may need to escalate to level 2. So what does level 2 boundary setting look like? Well, I call this redirecting. So you're still going to be calm, always calm, neutral, composed as best as you can, but you have to be maybe a little bit more firm. So you can be a little more direct and say something like, I hear the urgency. So you're acknowledging what they're sharing, but you're not taking it personally. Let's focus on what needs to change. So you're listening, you're acknowledging, and then you're guiding the direction. So you're redirecting. If the conversation's starting to go in a way that is maybe starting to lean toward less productive, let's focus on what needs to change. Or you could say something like, understood. Let's get specific so I can address it. You could say something like, I'm very open to feedback. If you can give me specifics, then I can work on this in real time. So these are examples of level 2 boundary setting. So you're still calm, composed, just a little more firm, and you're redirecting. So you're not reacting, you're guiding the conversation in each of these examples. And then sometimes still, you might need to level up the boundary setting a little bit further to level 3, which is more explicit. So explicit boundary setting, which this one, when you think about boundary setting, you may think that you might need to jump to level 3 the first go round, but you don't have to. I think the explicit boundary setting, use this one selectively, and you might need to be more explicit in your boundary setting when a behavior persists, or when it's impacting your performance or somebody else's performance. So you're just going to be a little bit more direct. So you could say something like, I want to make sure we're aligned, and I do my best when I keep this focused and constructive. Or you could say something like, pause, let's reset for a second. I want to make sure we're having a productive conversation. So you're still approachable, you're calm, composed, you're showing that you're aligned, you want to work toward a solution. All you're doing is guiding the conversation. And it can feel very, very natural. Like I feel very natural and confident and comfortable saying each of these scenarios, but it's also can take some practice. So you can practice beforehand if you know that you're going into a conversation, or you can think back to a conversation that you didn't get the desired outcome, you didn't like how you felt after, and you can just replay it, and then you'll be more prepared next time. So the framework that I talked about, a real-time framework, very simple, and this takes just seconds to implement. So what does it look like? Well, first you want to pause. So you may feel like reacting. We're human. If somebody is coming to us or speaking at us in a way that maybe doesn't feel so good, whether it's an intentional or unintentional, first pause. There's a lot of power in that pause so that we don't react. Maybe take a quick breath, and then acknowledge and clarify. So in each of these examples, I acknowledged and clarified. I'm letting them know that I'm hearing them out, and then I'm clarifying with a question, and then from there, that question is also leading. So you're guiding the direction. So the real-time framework that you can use to practice boundary setting: pause, acknowledge and clarify, and then lead. So in the moment, what does this look like? Just another example. If somebody says something like, this is not where it needs to be, and we've talked about this. Ooh, so that I might feel a little pause there, a little resistance. I might be inclined to take that personally. For example, you could say, understood. Well, first pause, understood. So I'm acknowledging, and now I'm going to clarify. What specifically needs to be different from your perspective? And so then you're guiding the conversation. And the more you practice this, practice these statements, maybe put them in your own words if you've experienced some uncomfortable conversations or someone trying to cross your boundaries previously, so that you can practice and get better at asserting your boundaries moving forward. And that's going to help not only you and your authority, but it also helps the team because it helps to set clear expectations and it helps with alignment. And again, the patterns that you want to watch out for, avoid trying to connect and gain respect through over explaining, through over apologizing. And a big one is emotional labor. So this is quieter, but it eats up your time and your energy and your focus. So what I mean by emotional labor, this is when you're taking responsibility for somebody else's emotions or time or their schedule or their boundaries at the expense of your own. And it's sort of like this underlying invisible work that is very draining. So for example, what this could look like, and this happened to me the other day, and I paid attention to how I was feeling. And I gave some attention to, okay, what is getting under my skin right now? Why am I feeling so frustrated? So an example, I'm very good at prioritizing my time. I understand that my important, I call it hardcore focus work, is how I'm going to make my bigger impact. So I need to carve out time for that. And then I need to protect that time. So this involves first getting honest with yourself about what matters, what's important to you, how you're going to make your impact, what you need to prioritize, and then protecting your time, which again, that's the challenge. And yes, things are going to come up that are urgent. So I was very focused, and then I had a text come through on something else that was important. Can I call you in 10 minutes? And then I hesitated a little bit. I wanted to protect my time. So I kind of struggled with this a little bit. And I said, sure. But then what happened is I'm carrying emotional labor because now I'm distracted. Maybe I'm going to get a call in 10 minutes. Maybe I'm not going to get a call in 10 minutes. And then 10 minutes came and went, and I'm trying to focus on my protected time block focus work, but I'm half distracted. And so I'm slowing myself down. So instead, I could have set a boundary and said, sure, I can be available at 11:30 or 12:30, which works for you. And so this way, I'm not carrying this emotional labor about, well, her time is important too. So this is just an example of when our boundaries get tested all throughout the day, and it's often unintentional. The other person's not thinking about, well, I'm going to just take up their time and not be considerate of their time. It's up to you as a leader, and then demonstrate that for your team to protect your time. And so that's just a simple example there. So that emotional labor, pay attention to that. If you notice yourself feeling that as well throughout the day, where you're doing that invisible work of focusing on giving more respect to somebody else's boundaries over your own time. And so you want to replace that invisible work with clarity, with composure, with directness. Great. Yes, I can chat. I can be available at this time or this time. And then you can free up your focus. You don't have a distraction now. You know when the call is set. That's just an example. And just another reminder to hold this thought. Remember to think, I don't match the tone, I set the tone. And leading by example is one of the best forms of leadership that we can demonstrate, and one of the kindest gifts that I think we can give to others. Maybe others don't yet understand our behavior, but when you model that behavior, when you lead by example, others are going to pay attention and maybe get curious about it. So just real quick, recapping the levels. Boundary setting level 1, which I think is the most powerful implicit boundary setting. So this is about tone, pace, response time, and then avoiding those behaviors like apologizing and over explaining. So you're going to lead with consistent, direct, calm, clear communication, and that's authority. And then level 2, this is when you redirect. So let's focus on what needs change, or what's the top priority. So again, here, you're not reacting to the conversation, you're guiding the conversation. And then sometimes, yes, we need to elevate to that level 3. Let's reset. So you might have to pause and say something a bit more direct, or I want to keep this constructive. But a lot of the time, you don't have to even ever get to that level 3. Sometimes we do. And yes, it is uncomfortable, but the more you practice this boundary setting, you're going to free up your time and your focus, and you're going to do a better job for your team. And then you're demonstrating that leadership behavior for others. And most of the time, you can use that implicit boundary setting, and you're going to feel better. You're going to feel less frustrated, less distracted, and more focus. And then again, the framework, you want to pause, acknowledge and clarify, and then lead. And I invite you to do an after action review. Think about times where you were doing some of those, you found yourself doing some of those behaviors that you want to look out for: over apologizing, over explaining, carrying that emotional labor, giving more concern to others in their time than your own time. And do an after action review, play it back, and think about how you feel in your body when you are doing some of those behaviors, when you're over explaining, when you're apologizing, when you are giving your time when you didn't plan to, sacrificing some of your own protected time for somebody else. How's that making you feel? Pay attention to that. There's a reason that it doesn't feel very good. And then when you dig a little bit deeper, you'll likely realize, I'm letting my boundary be crossed here. And you want to take responsibility for yourself because you have control over just and only yourself, but that's actually a lot. So when you do this reflection, think about an experience. Maybe you worked on setting a boundary and you had a positive experience. Maybe you didn't do so great. Either is okay. The point is, where the lesson is going to lock in is in the reflection, and then planning for next time. So you can ask yourself, all right, did I react or did I respond? Did I find myself over explaining? Did I redirect to clarity? Did I set the expectation? So play it back. What did you do? And then you can ask yourself something like, okay, if you used too many words and were apologizing or over explaining, what would I say next time in one sentence? And then you can do deeper self-reflection. And it sounds like a lot of work, and it kind of is, but it only takes moments. And then the more you do this, these after action reviews, the self-reflection, it just takes moments, and you get right to the root issue quickly. And then you get to okay, this is the solution, the new action I can take moving forward. And then you practice that action in real time. And then it just becomes your new practice, your new success habit moving forward. And then others adjust to you. But ask yourself some deeper questions like, okay, where am I feeling the resistance? And identify the emotion that's behind that resistance. Where is it coming from? And then ask yourself, okay, how do I want to feel? And then what's an action I can take that would toward that direction? All right. And so remember, I don't match the tone. I set the tone. That statement makes me feel super empowered when I say it. So practice it. And if you want to come back to the video or message me and let me know your thoughts, I'd love to hear where you might be struggling with boundary setting, what worked for you in this video, what works for you in the past, if you have some other ideas that you want to share. And remember, when you get consistent in how you show up, you won't have to force your boundaries. So that'll just get easier and easier. People will just adjust to you. So that's it for this one. Thank you for watching. My name's Amy Miller, and I help leaders think clearly under pressure so they can lead with authority. All right, we'll see you in the next one. And don't forget, if you got some value, hit like and subscribe.